Now, Georgia officials have actually released a specialty license plate that has civil rights groups driving themselves up the wall. Yes, terrible driving puns. You can only find them here. Why? Well, because this license plate features the Confederate battle flag. Now, the Atlantic Journal-Constitution reports that there are two sides to this issue. Those who feel that the battle flag honors their heritage, Confederate heritage, and others that see the flag as pretty much racist tool of oppression. Now, Southern Christian Leadership Conference spokesman Maynard Eaton said that the state should not have sanctioned the battle emblem to appear on the Georgia tag. He said, quote, to display this is reprehensible. We don't have license plates saying Black Power. Fair point. Spokesman Ray Berry of the Georgia Division of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, which is the group that, by the way, that requested these plates, said that, no, we didn't mean any offense. Quote, we believe that everyone has a right to preserve their heritage. Southerners have just as much right to be proud of their heritage as anyone else. Now, I actually agree with that. You do have the right to be proud of your heritage. But let me be 100% clear. I think the Confederate flag, on its face, is a flag of treason. If that is your heritage and you are proud of it, feel free. Display it loud and proud. This is America, and we have the right to do that. Thoughts?
The Confederate flag may very well be a flag of treason, but so is the Don't Tread on Me flag, and that's part of American history. Like, we're a country that is born out of a rebellion, and if the Southerners want to have their Confederate flag, in my opinion, it's not a big deal. And I understand that obviously there's racist context in there, but need I point out that there were slave states in the Union Army as well. Like, not every state seceded from the Union. Not every slave state seceded from the Union.
All right, Jordan, as our Southerner, let me have it.
Hold on. Can I have permission to go at least in the initial round? Can I have permission to go last? Because I would love to hear Dan's thoughts on this as a non-American. I guess he's the closest thing we have to an objective observer in this discussion. So I want to hear what Dan has to say, and then I'll come in and tell everybody why you're all wrong.
All right, Dan, go.
There's a couple of interesting points here. I think, one, let's point out our privilege here as four white guys. We're not going to get offended by this. Well, yeah. I would totally understand that it's offensive. I also see what you're trying to say with you did come out of a history of rebellion, but let's be honest, that specific flag definitely had a cause. The racism was definitely part of that. The broader point I would bring up, though, is if the government just didn't need that extra $5, I'm sure it works the same way there. Maybe it doesn't, so correct me if I'm wrong, but vanity plates here cost, if you want like the Jays or Leafs logo on your license plate, it's a little extra money. I really wish we'd get rid of that. Like, just don't keep things on your license plate. Like, this is just silly. Because the government has to start getting into these kinds of arguments with people about, like, you know, the libertarian in most people would be like, why can't Black Power have like a Black Panther, you know, license plate? And then Bill O'Reilly gets shows for the next 2 weeks. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that are great fodder. As a cultural symbol, I don't think people know the history of the flag enough. I think the history of the up here, you will see Confederate flags, and it has nothing to do with knowing anything about the Civil War. It has everything to do with Lynyrd Skynyrd, you know, making Freebird a really kick-ass song. So you've got a lot of people who just know it from like a pop cultural sense, from like the Dukes of Hazzard straight on through to like Kid Rock, and that's sort of just, it's just this flag that represents Southern rock in a weird way. So I mean, there's a lot of ignorance around it. I just don't understand why it needs to be on a license plate. Like, it just seems like you're opening up a giant hurtful can of everything when you could put a license plate, you could put a damn bumper sticker on your car, or you could do whatever you want. Get the General Lee. I mean, whatever works for you to celebrate your pride. But I'm with it. I think it's an offensive symbol.
And Sean, I just want to go back to something that you said in one of our previous stories, like way back, when we were arguing about the vanity plates. You said, quote, "Let's ban vanity plates. They're stupid." What do you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, this isn't like, it doesn't say anything on there. It's just like a logo, like a Confederate flag logo. It's basically like my license plates used to have the Statue of Liberty on them, and now they don't. And that doesn't really bother me because it was a statue, and you should be able to have that. It doesn't say something stupid on it, right? So I don't consider this a vanity plate.
Can I get a quick clarification on this, just because I don't know how your license system is? Is this now going to be on all state plates, or is this just something you can opt in for if you want?
I think it's an alternative. Like right now in New York, we have white license plates and orange ones.
Okay.
And right now you could choose either one, but eventually you'll be pushed onto the orange ones because they show up better in traffic light cams.
Okay.
But like, so
Yeah,
it's optional.
It's even more optional than what Sean just laid out. This is something we do here in the state. It's kind of like vanity plates. Like my wife on her car has Ouachita Baptist University plates. That's where we went. That's our alma mater.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what we have too. We have like a logo on the side. It's like
exactly. Yeah.
Whatever
So like you can get like disabled veteran plates, Iraq veteran plates. My dad has Vietnam veteran plates. You can get in Arkansas. You can get like Game and Fish Commission plates that go to conservation efforts, stuff like that. This is one of those things that goes probably to some historical society or something like that to help maintain. My guess would be, I really should have done more research. I apologize if I'm completely off, but my guess would be that this is going to be something that goes towards like maintaining Civil War markers and stuff like that.
All right.
And
So
these are commemorative plates. They're not vanity plates where you change the letters to say something dumb. So it's a little different, Jeff, who's gonna use my quotes against me.
I'll use your quotes against you, though, but I'll just take the banner of your quote, and I agree with it, and I'll be the guy in this panel then that says, like, can we get rid of this? Like, you can support whatever sports team or whatever in your own way. You don't need to be on your license plate, because it does just go down to these. It happens here too, just like dumb arguments about what's acceptable and what's not.
well, I think the most unacceptable thing is that it's state sanctioned. Like you're actually buying it from the state of Georgia, and Georgia's not the only one that's had it. Texas, Alabama, maybe even
Texas. Texas did not have it. It was.
It's being challenged.
It failed in Texas for the reasons we're discussing tonight, which kind of makes sense. The Confederacy, Texas was a part of the Confederacy, but it does not have quite as strong of a. Texas has its own independent streak going on, whereas the other states in the South, the east of Texas, identify more as Confederate states. Texas, since it had that status of being its own country for a while, kind of identifies by itself, even though it was part of the Confederacy.
And you also got to remember, there's a lot of mixed up bad things in our history. Like our founding fathers owned slaves, but we still revere them. Robert E. Lee, the general for the Confederate Army, actually freed his slaves personally, but he decided to side with the Confederacy because he believed that Virginia's sovereignty reigned supreme over the federal government. So there is a mixture of arguments to make that it is a historical symbol and not necessarily a specifically racist symbol, the Confederate flag. And it's in pop culture, like Dukes of Hazzard and all those places that Dan mentioned, and a billion more. So it's not the worst thing. And if you're gonna have commemorative plates and this is an option, I wouldn't get it. But if you got it, I wouldn't necessarily say you're a bad person.
But do you think that, and we'll get to you in a second, Dan, but I want to ask you, do you think that maybe...
Oh, I'm sorry, I have to fact check Sean. As the Southerner in the group, Robert A. Lee didn't free his slaves. He was supposed to upon inheriting them and did not. He reneged on that promise.
Ooh, fail. But I just wanted to ask, before we get that, is the pop culture, is using this flag in the pop culture sort of a way to, and excuse the pun, whitewash history?
Yeah, 100%. And everybody uses it up here. Once again, we don't have the American history. is a redneck, like whatever you want to, whatever pejorative or whatever bad term you want to use. It is not minority culture in Toronto driving around with that on their whatever, their truck or whatever. And I mean, I get why people want it. I just don't think the government should be in the business of doing this kind of stuff. And also, it is hard. Yes, you can pick and choose. Before I let Jordan just like finish us all off here, but you can pick and choose, Sean, like specific examples of history of how we're bad. But shouldn't we be going in the right direction? Like, it's opposed to adding more things to the pile that are kind of not only just whitewashing history, but trying to kind of cover up the bad things. Like, I don't think the solution to people, celebrating past leaders that had a ton of problems, like we do in Canada as well, is to like keep doing that continually.
And I think that one thing that needs to be, I think, sort of explained, because a lot of, I'm guessing, I'm not a Southerner, but I think that a lot of people feel that, or are sort of ignorant to what the flag actually meant and see it as a source of, pride. Like, yeah, we stood up to the federal government, but it's not so bad. It's the rebel flag. It's we're saying that the federal government can suck it. And as an American, you definitely have that right to say. But I still think people are ignorant to the history.
I got that, but you also got to remember that we're a nation of rebranding. So, like, the fact that people are rebranding this symbol isn't like the worst thing to me. And I would probably side with Dan, and I'm not like reversing my position, but I would side with Dan. If you're gonna have like no commemorative plates, I'm cool with that. But like, if you're gonna have it and people want it, like, just don't buy the plate if you don't like it. And if you don't like people having the plate, don't associate with the kind of people who would buy a Confederate flag commemorative plate. Like, it's not gonna change it. Like, to me, what's the difference between you buying the plate or painting the Confederate flag on your car, which enough
the
Southerners
state
do?
It's the state that would be the difference. The state is issuing it, which sends a broader message to society.
And that's the reason that I'm I get sort of mad at this whole thing, is because it is state sanctioned. If people are being if people want to put it on their cars and put it in the back of their trucks and basically show the world how what they stand for, if they aren't ignorant to their history, of course, and I'm not saying everybody is. I'm kind of treading in sort of dangerous territory here. But I'm saying, if you're not ignorant to the history and you still feel like you want to support this, then I think you're a bad person. But that's just me. But Jordan, we've been waiting long enough for you to come after us. Go.
I'm probably not going to come after you as hard as you think I might. Plus, a lot of the points I wanted to bring up have been brought up by all three of you, actually. And I do want to say, if somebody wants to fact check me on the Robert E. Lee thing, I will happily concede that I'm wrong, because like a good Southerner, I want to believe Robert E. Lee was this romantic figure we make him out to be. But I do know that at least for part of his life he owned slaves. It was pretty harsh with him. He was also pretty harsh with his soldiers and freedmen as well. So it wasn't like there was a particular strain of racism that led his harshness. He expected people to be as good as he was at everything they did, because he succeeded at everything he did.
Sounds
Anyway,
familiar. Sounds familiar.
To kind of, Jeff, to your point of having an issue with the state seeming to sanction this, I want to say the state of Georgia also sanctioned secession in the first place. This is part of state history. That's where I kind of take issue with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference gentleman who said, we don't have black power plates. One, I don't know, maybe we should. I wouldn't really have a problem with that. But two, like, Georgia never took an official stance or a historical stance to succeed in the name of black power or to become a black power state. Maybe they should have. I think that would be pretty cool if that happened. Not so much the succession, but becoming, instead of well, I don't know what Georgia's state motto is, but if they were the Black Power state, I mean, I'd be okay with that. But anyway, so like that's the difference. I mean, that's why why the state's authoring Civil War plates and not Black Power plates is because this is a part of our history as Americans.
Well, part of your history, though, is being un-American, because there is nothing more un-American than seceding from America.
There's nothing more un-American, and there's nothing more American, and I'm going to get to that. So hear me out.
Read the Declaration of Independence.
That is, look, I will concede that is a good point.
There's no.
And to go back to the Robert E. Lee thing, and I don't want to keep going over this. He was opposed to slavery in 1856, but when his father-in-law died, he inherited slaves and he was freeing them slowly, like very slowly. So, but it should be pointed out that many Union generals owned slaves as well.
It's true. And Robert E. Lee was part of a movement called the Slave Apologist, who justified slavery as an economic model because it's what the economy in the South was built on, but primarily because of their Christian faith. They were against it while owning slaves, so it's not really an admirable position. But in the most airy-fairy theoretical sense, he was anti-slavery, but his actions clearly didn't back that up. So I don't want to give him credit for that.
As a Canadian on the panel, I do just want to, just so I can keep my citizenship, I do want to say I am not supporting Robert E. Lee. I get your history, but I disagree with. He was a racist.
Oh no! I mean, Lincoln was a racist. Virtually everybody was a racist at that time. Like,
I'm not willing to do the Cirque du Soleil mind gymnastics.
Oh no! I'm
just trying to forgive Robert E. Lee.
I'm just saying, like, there were other issues that compelled Southerners to revolt besides slavery, and that's evidenced by the fact that not all slave states revolted. Like, some of them fought on the Union side, Like, look, I understand why people don't like the Confederate flag, and I would never. I'm a Northerner, even though I was born in Texas. I've never lived in a house with the Confederate flag or anything like that. Like, I'm a Northerner. I have no interest in it, and I'm white, so take this with a grain of salt, even though I'm only half white. But I just don't take any offense to it, and I understand the history of it. I understand that slavery is awful. Obviously, I understand that. The Civil War was awful, obviously, but I'm just not gonna go to war on this issue, pun intended.
Oh wow. Oh. Well, and once again, Sean, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but Sean has brought up another good point that allows me to segue. The issue with this whole flying the Confederate flag really comes down to the whitewashing of the Old South and of the Civil War to say that it wasn't about slavery, and there's an absolute position, but at the same time, it's a nuanced position. One, the South succeeded. The Civil War was about slavery, period. Yes, it was about state rights. It was about the states' rights to make slavery legal.
As an economic system.
Exactly. And there were other issues. There were clear differences between the agrarian South and the industrialized North. There were other issues, but that's not what they went to war over. That's what they disagreed over. That's what they didn't like each other over. What they went to war over was slavery because it's what their economy was built on. However, and here's the nuance that you don't ever see, because you're not going to see it on conservative outlets because they're too busy apologizing for the South, and you're not going to see it on liberal outlets because I don't know why, but I've never seen this. The South went to war for slavery. The North did not go to war to end slavery. The North went to war to hold the Union together. The North was not on an anti-slavery crusade. The South was fighting for slavery. The North was not fighting against it. They were fighting to keep the country together. That's why Lincoln went to war. So all of that said, let me just kind of tie all this together here. The War of Northern Aggression, as we jokingly refer to it down here, it was indeed a war over slavery. There's simply no way around that. And to say otherwise is to shamelessly rewrite history while at the same time refusing to learn lessons from the mistakes from our forefathers. Now, I want to make my position clear on that. I'm no Confederate apologist, but that said, this is an issue, like I said, it's got a lot more nuances, especially to Southern sons and daughters like myself. I don't know, my liberal friends from other parts of the country, or in Dan's case, other parts of the world, truly care to understand. If I can get anecdotal here and folksy, I had a buddy in high school. He was a black kid. I had a 69 Chevy pickup with a 400 small block. He had an old F-150 that he told me his dad had put a 5.0 liter V8 from a Mustang in. And we used to hang out. We'd drag race together all the time until he got tired of me beating him. And one day I was out riding with him. I can't remember if we were in his pickup or we were in somebody else's. I remember he was driving, and he had a rebel flag draped across the bench seat there in the cab of the pickup. And in that moment, there was no racism. There was no hatred. It didn't matter that he was black, that I was white. All that mattered is that we were two young Southern men who were both proud of our Southern heritage, warts and all. And what was most important in the cab of that pickup wasn't what that flag may have stood for sesquicentennial ago. What was important was that a white kid and a black kid could come together and form a friendship in the land and in the shadow of that flag. That we were united by beautiful things that we cherished, that made us uniquely Southern right there in that present moment. And we were proud to have overcome the shameful, horrible things that we'd forsaken that would have made us uniquely Southern 150 years ago. And while arguing about whether or not the Confederate flag can carry the symbolism of what made the Old South noble, without at the same time representing the horrible, inhuman, evil details of that same Old South, arguing about that, by no means, it's not trivial. I don't want to belittle it. But I would submit that it misses the greater point to be made here that this issue really brings up. And Jeff brought it up, I think, in a negative context. And I guess maybe that's the Southern versus Northern mentality. But, I wish my forefathers had not gone to war for their perceived right to own other human beings as property. I truly do. And I know that symbols like the Confederate battle flag, the rebel flag, whatever you want to call it, they don't exist in a vacuum. And even though we're constantly redefining them and making them our own, at the end of the day, we can't divorce them from their ultimate historical context. The Confederate flag is a flag that's associated with slavery, period. But if you can just try to imagine, just for a brief second, a world where we could separate these things from that context, to drop the baggage from them, what I take away from this discussion is that in the time of warrantless wiretaps, drone strikes against U.S. citizens without a trial, indefinite detention, every other way the federal government truly threatens the freedoms guaranteed to us by the Constitution, that same government still allows us to fly a flag of open rebellion against it. And that, in and of itself, apart from all the baggage that comes with that flag, is a beautiful thing, and that's something to be cherished. And that's what the Confederacy, for all its faults, teaches us about America and teaches us about how to be Americans. That's a lesson that I hope we never unlearn, and I think the rebel flag can continue to teach us that lesson so long as we don't pretend, that we can ignore the baggage that comes with it.
I am actually going to attempt to talk after that well-said speech you gave, but I'm going to give you a bit of pushback, and this is coming from an outsider, so I feel like the rest of you are going to be a little bit tongue-tied because you are in that country and have to deal with the repercussions. But here is my question to you, though. Is there not, from an outsider's perspective, one of the things that I think always, and Britain has a similar kind of situation and problem with this as well, but as a young country, we don't have it so much in Canada. The question being, it's almost a perverse obsession with their history and the way things were. It's an anecdotal story that you told, and I'm sure there's lots of people that have that same story, but for many black people and many people in that country, that is a racist symbol. And there's going to be people that are going to be with you and against you on that. But my question is, you have state flags, you have home flags, you have city flags. There's so many ways to be proud and Southern without that symbol. And you just started the rant with, this started as, this is what we fought under in a war on slavery. So is there something it's almost Tea Party-like in a way? I wish things used to be the way they were?
No, without a doubt, there is a romanticization of the Old South. But I would push back. That's true of the U.S. flag. We romanticize U.S. history. Under the U.S. flag, we had slavery. under the U.S. flag, we pushed Indians off their land and did horrible, unspeakable things.
Sure.
And in recent years, we've done the same kind of stuff in the Middle East. And it was racially driven. It was driven by profit. It was driven by everything just as evil as what drove the Confederacy. But we don't associate that with the U.S. flag because the U.S., like we're winners, quote unquote. And that the same crimes committed under the Confederate flag have been committed under the U.S. flag. And then I'll also, Dan, you brought up there's other ways to be Southern, and remember that. I want to do a screen share here, guys, if you'll bear with me for just a second.
Sure.
This little dot right here in the Arkansas state flag, this star represents that we were part of the Confederacy. It's not a Confederate flag, but it still honors our Southern heritage. So is it as inherently racist? But you don't see people in arms about this, and I think it's every bit as much an honoring the Confederacy as a Confederate flag is. And so, like, again, I'm not trying to whitewash my Southern heritage. I'm not one of these people who believes the Old South is a wonderful place and that slavery was a minor part and it was about to go away in a year or two anyway, and the war probably just made it worse. There are people who genuinely believe that, and they're insane. What I'm trying to say is that we need to remember our Southern heritage with the same way that we remember the things that make us who we are. And slavery is an ugly, unforgivable, unjustifiable scar on U.S. history, but particularly on Southern history, because we fought for it after other parts of the country wanted to give it up, and we need to answer for that.
And to add something real quick in there is that it's an ugly scar that does not that needs to be. It does not need to be forgotten. It needs to be shown in all of its horrifying truth, and it's something that we shouldn't forget about. As in a historical perspective, we should always remember the things that we did.
And you also got to remember that the Civil War is the deadliest war for Americans in American history. It was a total disaster. It didn't need to be fought. Like, look at the way every other modern industrialized or modern Western country got rid of slavery. None of them had a war. Like, it usually was the government buying the slaves and setting them free. So the slave owners wouldn't feel like they got ripped off, and you would free people who deserve to be free. So, like, those scars haven't healed yet, unfortunately. Like, and if Southerners want to, like, fly the Confederate flag and they want to talk about, like, Southern pride and all that, as long as they're not actually advocating for racism or bringing back slavery, I'm totally fine with it. Like, it doesn't bother me.
But the problem is, though, is if we do look at where, like, a lot of racial tension is and where a lot of I'm just not ready to vote for Obama came from, and a lot of that stuff, that is the elephant in the room. Like, you can talk about it being a scab, but I'm pretty, like, from an outsider's perspective, it really does look like an open wound still, that it hasn't really ever healed over, and that's the problem for me. If I was somebody who, since we don't have a minority panelist here, the closest you have is a Canadian, I mean, I will stand up and say that is something that I could see being sort of problematic for me, is that we're sort of divorcing this as a part of the history when it's so obviously present in right now in the present.
No, Dan, that's an excellent point. Like, one, it's still an open wound, and not only is it a lie to say that the Confederacy was not birthed out of a fight, to continue slavery. It's also a lie now to say that there's still not racism associated with that flag. Well, one, it's not the Confederate flag. It's the Confederate battle flag. It's not their actual state flag, or the flag of the state, I guess I should say. But also, I think, though, and, guys, if I'm crazy on this, feel free to tell me. I can take it. But so you have people who hold the position that I have. Like, I don't fly a Confederate flag. When I was a kid, I had one. When I was like a young kid, I had one on my wallet. But that was more about being Southern than anything else. But whenever you have people who hold to a position like I just laid out, that I feel like is honest both to the noble and ignoble parts of Southern heritage. Whenever you say, no, there's no nuance, the Confederate flag is blatantly racist, what you do is you push people like me out of the conversation, and all you're left with are people who fly the flag for racist reasons and people who are totally against it. And so that you perpetuate this cycle of it being a racist symbol, because people who want to acknowledge the evils of the Confederacy while at the same time acknowledging things. And I'm not talking about people who are talking about how the Civil War was about states' rights. I got no time for those people. It was about slavery. I'm talking about people who say, yeah, it was about slavery, but that doesn't mean they didn't also have some good points. Just like our founding fathers, who all owned slaves, and among them really only Benjamin Franklin, who actually 180'd and went from owning slaves to being an abolitionist, was an abolitionist. Just like they were wrong for that, they also had good ideas. And there were good things about the Confederacy. Like for some reason, we're not okay with living with tension anymore. Like either we have to whitewash the Confederacy and make it this beautiful, noble thing, or it has to be this completely evil thing. Whenever, like every other human institution, it was freaking both, man. There were some horrible, horrible, horrible things about the Confederacy. There were a lot of good things about the Old South, too. And I am proud of what we've learned and where we've come from those horrible things, and I'm proud of what we cling to in those noble things. And that's what this means to me as a Southerner.
Oh, and I just have to point out that I am the closest thing to a minority on this panel, since I'm half Puerto Rican. So everybody who's against, I literally am. So everybody who is against my position is a racist.
That's fair. I'm glad you brought us together at the end.
I'm totally kidding about that, but not about the Puerto Rican thing. That's real.
All right, Dan, do you have something more to add?
I'm half ginger.
No, I'm actually being 100% serious right now.
No, I know you are. That's why I said sorry. I know Canadians just say that like reflexively, but I meant it that time.
Oh.
But no, like it's. I think that. Listen, I think the only thing that I would say to that, because I can't obviously speak to, I'm not American, so I am kind of playing devil's advocate here, is that in terms of symbols and in terms of things that mean something, it's always going to be difficult because certain people have such an ingrained history in it, but the people that were victimized under that symbol, or people that were hurt under that symbol, or the things said under that symbol, I think need to have greater weight than the fact that there were some good things done under, yes, it comes and goes, and good and bad, but the bad is pretty bad here. Like, the bad represents a lot of bad that hasn't, as I said, like a lot of those attitudes are still there, and that's, I think, the real problem. If somehow the South lost that reputation, or had it gotten better at certain race relation situations, I think people would be a little bit more understanding that you probably just like Leonard Skinner, or you just probably like, or your grandfather, believed in certain things that made sense at that time, but it's still problematic. And I think that the modern history is what the problem is for the past.
Yep, I'll agree with that.
Yeah, well, and I freely concede that I say this as a white man who was never would have been oppressed, under the Confederacy. So, like, I'll freely concede that. Like, obviously, I don't know what it's like to look at that flag as, as an African American, and I never will. But at the same time, like, this is, I feel like what we're doing, though, by eliminating people with the views I've laid out from the conversation, is we're perpetuating the argument against it, saying, oh, there is this great modern history of racism with it. Well, yeah, it's because the people who want to be honest about it, are intelligent enough to know that they can't speak up because they'll come across as they'll be labeled racist.
Well, the whole issue, though, I think it's not that we're trying to push people like you out of the conversation, is that we're trying to say that there's a history to this, and people need to know the history.
From an American standpoint, somebody brought up, and I think it was Sean, but it might have been Jordan. It might have been everyone, really, at one point. Mm-hmm. I think that the point we all should be, I think we agree on and should fight for, is that people don't know their history and need to know their history better.
Right.
And so somebody brought up, like, America has a lot of problems, yet we still fly an American flag, but we literally, America did kind of genocide the Indian population of your country.
Just kinda.
Right, and I mean, and Canada's going through a lot of that too. We just celebrated our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald's birthday, and then these, like the upper elites of Ontario here in my province, held this big ball, and some people were dressed in red face. So it was so that's the problem, right? Is that you can always say, well, it was a long time ago, and we're just trying to have, but always that stuff in the present comes back up to drive the divisions deeper. And so that's what I think people need to think about is, yes, we don't know our history well enough in all countries. I think we don't understand, and also the school systems, right? Like, they don't want to teach you that. They don't want to be like, and then your ancestors wiped out an entire group of people. Like, it's sort of always glossed over. And so I think that that's the real problem, is that a lot of people are historically illiterate.
And we put historical figures on a pedestal when they're actually people. I mean, the founding fathers owned slaves. The abolitionists didn't want women to have the right to vote. The women's suffragists were in favor of discrimination against blacks. Martin Luther King was anti-gay. Like, they're human people. Like, they have some great ideas and they do some historical great things. But every group of people in history were against the next group of people in history, and like, it's generally a rule that I live by, that they're all imperfect people and they have some good ideas every now and again.
And we seem in modern times to have a real problem with respecting and understanding our past and projecting it onto our present. There seems to be there needs to be a difference between those two things, and I'll give you like the most comical, obvious example of that from us left crazy people is like the Guy Fawkes mask, right? Like, just like we took one part of it, we kind of cafeteria'd the history on it. We like that one part we took out from the rebellion side of things. Wait, what's the rest of the story? Oh, right. And so that's the sort of historical problem that we have in modern times. Tea Party, we obviously could all cherry pick from that group of like, Thomas Jefferson, what Glenn Beck believes one week, to the next. So the fact that works, though, says that the general population just needs more history. So school money, let's all agree on more money for history.
No. Less.
Sorry, Sean. What?
Less money for education. We've been over this. Just spend the money better.
Okay, well, more funneled into people understanding what the hell is going on.
Right.
And for goodness sakes, Texas, don't rewrite your history books. Or anybody, I should say. Don't rewrite your history books. And okay, and let me be clear too. It's not like I want third graders to learn about all the bloody massacres or anything like that. But at some point during your education, you do need to learn about that stuff.
I mean, you have to learn that they're people. Is what I was trying to get at before.
And I will definitely agree with your point. People are people. People are imperfect. People have faults, and people do good things and people do bad things.
And the thing is, it's amazing because like I bring up the Martin Luther King thing. Martin Luther King had quotes that I'm like, what? Like, he was anti-rock and roll. Like, he thought it was like the devil's music, and like, but you got to understand, he was a preacher in the '60s, right? Like, he had great ideas when it came to equality of the races and all that, but people are imperfect. Like, it's just something that you have to deal with, and like, you shouldn't.
And I have a feeling that if he were black and gay, he might have been a little bit more for gay rights.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's not even that. It's just nobody was pro-gay in like the '60s publicly. So why would Martin Luther King be? Like, you know what? We have a history of imperfect people doing great things in their time, but also doing awful things when measured by modern standards. Like,
but we also have a great history of whitewashing and not ever speaking of those other things. Or not even I'll give you a modern example of like, we even sort of have turned within a couple of months Nelson Mandela into like a Morgan Freeman postage stamp versus like what he actually did. We've kind of you see like people who have to struggle. It's also it's sort of a disservice for people who want to be truly inspired by people too. I mean, we turn everybody into an inspirational Facebook meme as opposed to showing all the fight they had to go through and the things that they had to compromise. And the full story of almost all historical figures is so much more enriching than what we get on the 30-second soundbite or
Upworthy
PSA,
post.
or Upworthy post, right?
A
You
great
won't believe how great Nelson Mandela was.
a great example
Blow
is
your mind.
a great example is remember when Vladimir Putin stopped us from going into Syria by brokering a deal with the Syrians, and people were like, "Give Vladimir Putin Obama's Nobel Peace Prize."
Right.
I'm like, no, he's doing that. It's a good thing that we're not going to Syria, but Vladimir Putin's only doing that to spit in our eye. Like, he's still a bad guy. We have a series of bad people in charge everywhere.
Geopolitics will make you do good and bad things.
Yeah, that will do something good just to like he stopped the war just to show up the U.S. Like, he didn't do it for noble reasons. Look what he's doing in the Ukraine.
Well, that's a whole other topic. Like,
I know. I'm just saying. Like, people think like, oh, he did one good thing. He's a messiah now. Like, that's not how it works.
But I think just general intelligence in general, like just we really have. He started out talking about how I think people don't know how to read polls in the newspaper correctly. Therefore, newspapers can go full hog and be, here's this poll, 71%. Well, no one's reading the margin of error, so they can say whatever they want and fill pages. And it's an interesting story. Where if we all
sort of
were
the same issue.
Sorry.
This is like sort of the same issue.
It is. It's
People
like
don't get into things.
If people had a better grasp on their own history and things like that, I mean, and even just modern politics, you want to talk about, Canada had a scandal here last week because of the LGBT issues in Sochi. When Vladimir Putin went into Canada House at the Olympics, a lot of the Canadian athletes took selfies and posted them on Twitter, like, "Hey, Vladimir!" Like, we're like, "Wish you." It was on Valentine's Day he did it, so it was like, "I wish he was my Valentine," which caused obviously an uproar because, guys, there's politics involved here, and he's done a lot of bad things. And yeah, like, it's an important thing that people need to just sort of, we have this celebrity vision of politicians, which then, obviously happens to our historical figures or even leaders that are no longer in power but had a legacy like a Mandela. And so, of course, like, I'm not, these are like easier things compared to something like the battle flag, which carries so much weight with it.
Right.
But we can't even get those things right, the simplistic modern problems.
And what you're forgetting, Dan, is that Vladimir Putin wrestles bears with his shirt off, so I wouldn't go mocking him.
No, it's true.
Again, what my whole point of my little rant there earlier, it was not like, again, I'm not trying to whitewash history. I'm not trying to take away the importance of this debate. But what's really at the heart of this issue here is that in America, we have a government that is willing to recognize the historical significance, right down to the flag they flew, that, hey, our citizenry is willing to open up armed rebellion against us if we trample on what they perceive to be their rights. And we are willing to acknowledge that as a government. And I think now, more than ever, we can't lose sight of that. We have to hang on to that because that's the last shred of constitutional freedom that we have.
I think a lot of people would see that, though, as the continuation of white privilege. That's sort of, I think it is that balance, right? Like, I understand where you're coming from, but I think there's a lot of other people that would say, I'm not sure if that's what it represents. To me, it represents that if you're white, there's a different set of rules, and you get it on the license plate.
Hey, if you enjoyed this clip, make sure to like and leave a comment below, or even share. Sharing is caring. If you want to see more TYT Nation videos, go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TYT Nation. Thank you for watching. Hey, if you enjoyed this clip, make sure to like and leave a comment below, or even share. Sharing is caring. If you want to see more TYT Nation videos, go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TYT Nation. Thank you for watching.